You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. In this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into innovation in the health sector and the role that university research plays in this sector. Joining us today is Richard Gannotta, who is a recognized health sector leader with service in CEO/president and executive roles in some of the nation's most prominent academic and public health systems. He is currently the managing partner at Washington Square Advisors, where he serves in key strategic roles advising global med and biotech companies, health systems, and new ventures. Rick has held leadership roles as CEO of the University of California Irvine Health System, Senior Vice President of Hospitals at New York's NYC Health and Hospitals, and roles as President of Chicago's Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Duke Raleigh Hospital, part of the Duke University Health System, and North Carolina-based Wake Med Health and Hospitals. Rick is currently a senior lecturer of health administration at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Rick is also the host of the Healthcare Nation podcast, which engages thought leaders in the healthcare, bio, and medtech industry. Welcome, Rick. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm super excited to be here with you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we're doing this episode in person, which I'm so excited about. So not very often I get to do a lot of episodes in person. So thank you so much for joining me today. And Rick, I thought maybe the best way to kick this podcast off today is to ask you about your career journey, because you've really had an amazing career in the health sector in a number and variety of different roles. Tell us a little bit about your amazing journey to date.
Oh, I don't know if I'd call it amazing, but I'll just start with this. I always begin with, I'm just a kid from Brooklyn, which is the reality of things. And a kid who caught a couple of really good breaks along the way. But going way back, growing up in New York City, always interested in science, technology, and medicine, in fact, which brought me into the path that we're going to talk about, obviously. But, everyone has a twist and turn. I left high school before I graduated, so I'm a high school dropout, moved to Florida, and was kind of searching for a way to, pull everything together in my life and have, a career moving forward. Was thinking, what should I do? Become a paramedic or go into the medical field, et cetera. And there was a vocational training program that I signed up for, and it had a number of tests to get in. And I got in to become a nurse's aide and then a licensed practical nurse, an LPN. And that was the start of it, Lisa. I went in that program. It gave me a big break. And from there, I went to nursing school, had a bachelor's degree there, became a nurse practitioner, got my MBA, and ultimately my doctorate in healthcare administration and policy. And that kind of set the educational path going. But as the process really unfolded, it was the career opportunities that I had professionally that really were the defining moments. And that was working as a nurse at the bedside, really understanding patient care, the intricacies, the ins and outs of what that means with respect to healthcare delivery. There's no other training that is better than that when you think about the bedside. And scaling that up into running programs, ultimately big heart programs in both Florida and then North Carolina. And then working my way up into the C-suite of some high-performing organizations across the country, including very large safety nets like New York City Health and Hospitals, which was an incredible training ground. I pivoted at a certain point because I said to myself, look, I want to do all the things that are on my bucket list. And one of those was to dedicate a lot of my time to both advising, consulting, and also teaching. And I've always taught academically throughout my career, but I had more of a commitment to teaching, which was going to be part of my way forward. And also starting my own consulting firm, Washington Square Advisors, where we really are more of a boutique, very focused consulting firm, helping folks with navigating the intricacies of healthcare delivery and the health sector writ large. So that's really in a nutshell. I'd be remiss if I didn't say fantastic people along the way who are mentors and guides And those little folks who whisper in your ears, they've been with me the entire time. Chief among them, my wife, who's been my biggest fan, and going way back at times as, starting out as a nurse and then working my way up. It's great to have a partner who facilitates every dream and decision that you have without question. And I've been really grateful for that.
Yeah, I would say so. That's an amazing, incredible journey. And someone growing up and dropping out of high school and then moving to a totally new state and not being sure what to do. That's an incredible journey. And to end up where you've ended up is really incredible. So congratulations.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. There was a time when I didn't fully disclose that. But, as I've obviously gotten older, and it probably goes with success as well, I don't want to hold that back because, everyone's path is different. And sometimes we make decisions and choices make changes. And I want any young person out there who maybe made a what they might consider a mistake to say, no, you could pick yourself up, rechange things. Obviously, with me, school was a different route than perhaps others may have taken, but ultimately, it all worked out for me.
Yeah, and I think you illustrate by sharing your story that career paths aren't linear. They can have many twists and turns, and they can be very successful throughout all those twists and turns.
A lot of times it's distance traveled, right? So that's true. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. So I wanted to get into some specifics, and I thought I'd start off by asking you how you approach the translation and application of novel innovations into healthcare delivery.
Yeah, so let me start with, we think about novel innovations or disruptions or technology, right? And thinking of anything that could make something else or some process better. I have had a longstanding belief that technology is a new biology. There's no doubt about it. And just as biology informs and impacts an individual's health status, moving forward, technology will be equally influential on the health and wellness of society and of individuals. So that's a really big, at least for me, philosophy that underpins whenever I work with, startups, established companies, et cetera, or even as the CEO of some big organizations, same ethos that really guided me as I looked to innovation. But what I look at from an approach perspective is always being very holistic, comprehensive, and strategic. And strategic also means including the risks that are part of the process. Obviously, in the world of healthcare and the health sector, you have to integrate scientific discovery, clinical applications, and because it's a business, those market considerations that are out there as well, including competitive advantage. But the process always starts with, and you know this, validating the idea. Is it an unmet clinical need? Is the innovation addressing that need effectively, or is it something that's absolutely, in left field? If it's applicable, say in pharma or in biotech, is there clinical research, preclinical trials, clinical trials, regulatory approvals that are going to be obviously, looked at and taken into account? And the multidisciplinary team approach, you've got to have everyone at the table. And in healthcare, that includes not only clinicians, researchers, but also the folks who are in the regulatory side, the reimbursement side, the business side, and the consumer who has their hand on the lever that when they pull will decide what hospital they go to, a provider, their perspective represented as well. So I really do look for that. Now, I do want to add one other thing. Reimbursement and how you get paid in healthcare is one of those things that if you don't understand that and you miss that and you don't take that into the calculus up front, it is a big miss and very hard ground to recover from.
I can say as an IP attorney, I have seen that in startups where they haven't factored in the reimbursement and how they're going to be reimbursed and the reimbursement codes that they might be applicable for. And you're absolutely right. It's a huge miss and a big mistake.
Yeah. And ultimately, I use the business analogy a lot because I would say years ago, if you wanted to know what was happening in the healthcare delivery side, just read the cover of the Wall Street Journal and then, healthcare will be there in 10 years. That has changed now, but I've always thought matching healthcare delivery to the speed of business without compromising, because we're dealing with patients' lives, right? We're not, baking a cake here. It's a loaded proposition. That was always something that was also in the back of my mind as we really tried to look at creating systems, processes, and ultimately a care delivery system that was the best for the folks that we served.
Now, I wanted to ask you next if you could share an example of how a three-factor framing has identified out-of-field variables that have led to industry-changing performance.
Yeah, so let me give the audience, the listeners, a little background on three-factor framing. So I mentioned earlier, I have a great affinity for teaching. I've been involved with academia for many years at Duke and NYU, other institutions. I teach right now strategy and risk and health policy. Always been interested in that. Some time back, I really wanted to, from an academic perspective, understand and delve into and better analyze how disruptive innovation in the health sector, specifically as it relates to successful companies, how that really worked. And were there individual components to it that could be perhaps, reproduced? So part of that was, is there a common construct to that success? Is there a relationship between the variables in it? Is there a chronological component over time? Can you map them? Are they reproducible? And can I predict success? Now, obviously, I had notions of what that might mean. It has great market applications, programmatic applications. Obviously, you could see how that could be applied in a lot of different areas. And what we found and there was a team, not just me, but both on the academic side at institutions I work with who gave their input, that there were three foundational factors that really were key components of what I would say is the disruptive innovations. The first factor, we call it F1, is really market eligibility or ideation. And this is the idea itself and the demand for it. And the demand in the marketplace, both currently present, but also in future tense. And often these ideas, could be abstract if they're very early and they require some unpacking and planning to bring them to the market. But that's the first one is what is this idea and what's the market eligibility? So that would be first factor, F1. F2, the second factor is the governing processes, right? Those environmental gating conditions that would slow things down or speed them up, right? It could do both, right? Both are absolutely essential to understand if you're bringing, obviously, a product or an idea or program to market. So examples of this would be, consumer market demand or regulatory approval, the hurdles that could be in there, economic scaling, cost per unit, the application of advanced technology or the limitations to applying advanced technology. Those would be some of those gating conditions that would be associated with the second factor. The third factor, right, F3, is the out-of-field variable, right? This some would call it the X factor. And this, Lisa, is best described as an approach, a method, a technology that you would say is commonly used in another sector or field that can be applied or adopted to accelerate positively the conditions that might, have circumvented or marginalized or minimized those gating conditions that I mentioned in the second factor. And it could be an incredible accelerator. So at the end of the day, when you converge those three factors, right, it can complete an idea, accelerate an innovation, achieve speed to market that is giving an individual company a competitive advantage, and better ensure the likelihood that a product, service, program, idea can meet its target endpoint. And I'll just also say that it can be applied to idea generation, brainstorming. When you have an idea within an existing company, I want to figure out and pressure test how to, bring this forward. You could apply it there in team building. And I'd be happy to share an easy example.
Absolutely, please.
So when we looked at a lot of different examples from genomic sequencing to neuroprogramming for stroke patients, many different applications that are out there. But probably the best case and an older case is 1928 and the development of penicillin. And Fleming, of course, most folks think of penicillin, they think of mold and cheese, and that was the out-of-field variable. Well, perhaps so. But if you take a look at the history and unpack penicillin, what we find is that, not until World War II were folks able to really scale this to a level that could meet production demand, which was incredible when you think about infections plus World War II and the devastating impact of infections and the mortality rate at that particular time, which was about 50%. So what folks did was they used deep tank fermentation, right, from the United States, a technique that was used in agriculture, by the way, used in producing moonshine, in fact, to mass produce penicillin. And it made all the difference, obviously, at that particular time, meeting the urgent needs associated with wartime, but also transforming medical treatment and ultimately saving so many lives over so many years.
Yeah, that's a great example. It sounds like that 3-factor framing has a lot of applicability. As you just mentioned, it can be used, at team building, diversity, I would assume.
All aspects of diversity, when you think about cognitive diversity, the traditional definitions of diversity, if you apply this, particularly when you're thinking about building out teams or ideas and you want that kind of representation, it's a great way to apply it. And it kind of, from an objective perspective, you approach it with equanimity, which is a great way, I think, to tackle the issue.
Absolutely. So, Rick, I wanted to ask you, what role do you see for technology? I'm thinking about things like telehealth and AI in revolutionizing patient care. And I would imagine it's, especially AI, going to be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, let me just say a broad blanket statement first. It's going to revolutionize healthcare and the health sector. If we look at what's happening in the markets, I'm going to digress a second, and certainly in the venture capital side, where some firms might have a very broad focus with respect to their investment strategy. I don't think you could really do that when you are looking at the kind of content expertise that is required when you're looking at the new applications in clinical care, et cetera. And what you're seeing is folks that are very focused on this because it's such an incredible opportunity to change the game as it's been played. And the stats as it relates to healthcare, they're pretty poor across the board. If you look at the United States. So I'm very, very bullish on the application of technology. And I want to kind of unpack a bit of what you said with your question. First, with respect to COVID, that certainly accelerated a lot.
It did. And the telehealth and, decentralization of medicine and things like that certainly did.
Right.
Yeah.
The consumer aspects of it, what we can do. But telehealth certainly did that. I would say a hospital at home, the fact that you could get reimbursed for certain DRGs, which is the way Medicare pays for a diagnosis at home, the difference that wearables made, right? That kind of technology, fantastic. But I would predict also that the Internet of Things, the Internet of your things, the Internet of your medical things, and the Internet of surgical things, that there will also be a convergence of those different technologies at some point. And it's already happening. It's just the connectivity, the synthesis, and the ability to look at this over time has not yet, come to fruition. But it's getting there in bits and pieces. So first, let me talk about telehealth. We know that telemedicine has been around for a long time. It just wasn't reimbursed, right? Now, the pandemic changed all that. And the great benefit, of course, is access, particularly for remote or underserved populations.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that. Has great impact and utility in that world, reduces the burden when you think about folks coming into a clinic or even inpatient stays, really a game changer. Now, there are policy issues that are affecting that right now, but we'll save that for another question. When it comes to AI, on the other hand, I've always thought, wow, this supports clinical decision-making. This because of the incredible data sets that it informs, the large language models that we're seeing, et cetera. The impact on diagnostic accuracy equal to, I think in many cases, what we're seeing from our physician colleagues, the discovery side of things on the genetic components of, I would say, applications from pharma and genomics, the ability when you think about drug development and the speed to market for it to short circuit that is just absolutely incredible across the board. So I'm very, very bullish on all of these and the changes that they will make to the system. I think all for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially I've spent my career working in IP in the pharmaceutical sector, and anything that can speed drug development, get drugs to market faster, reduce the risk in terms of drug failures is a plus in my mind. So It's going to be very exciting to watch. So, Rick, I wanted to ask you how you and your team at Washington Square Advisors integrate into a client's workflow to help advance their strategic position.
Sure. Thank you for letting me answer that. I think the first thing, I think this is a general rule for anyone really engaging with teams that they're working with, seek to understand their unique challenges, right? And the objective that they have and the approach that they are going to take. I think being able to understand that is so important from the client's perspective. Then taking a collaborative approach, working closely with their leadership team to understand their philosophy, working closely with the operational teams to understand the processes, and really understanding their strategic goals. Do they have them? Is there a tactical plan that supports them? That's really important. I think also thorough market analysis, looking at growth opportunities, what kind of technology are they going to implement? Is there policy out there that is going to rate limit? This is the third factor or second factor that might be short-circuited by some sort of out-of-field variable. How do we use tools to get them further faster? A SWOT analysis, a Pastel analysis, as I said, the three-factor framing. Those are the big issues. But at the end of the day, also identifying, and we do this a lot, what populations do you want to serve? And can we get there sooner and do a little test, a pressure test, et cetera? Are there potential partner organizations that we need to be talking to? This is really important. Hospitals, health systems, others. Are there key opinion leaders who are out there that we need to get on board and get their perspectives? And also, and this is a reality, connecting folks to the venture capital and the private equity space when it makes sense. And that to me is probably the best way to sum up what we do and how we approach. It's different for every client, but that's what's unique about what we do.
Oh, that's fascinating. And it sounds like you really add a lot of value with the startups that you work with.
Yeah, I found in what was so, at least for me, rewarding and meaningful is that coming from a long history professionally of first working at the bedside, then to the boardroom and the C-suite and having roles as chief executive officer, it's been incredibly rewarding. What I found with the clients that we serve right now, startups, but also existing companies as well as health systems, sometimes they need another perspective that comes from that office. And when you have a founder who's an engineer or comes from a different background, perhaps doesn't really know healthcare, but has an incredible idea, they really do appreciate having that trusted voice, that content expertise, and that's what we bring.
Well, we can't talk about healthcare innovation, Rick, without talking about IP because it really is critical. So I'm curious to get your view on how you navigate IP challenges when you work with startups and established companies in the health sector.
Yeah, first, I would say this. I rely on folks like you to help me with that.
I hope so. Otherwise, you have a lot of problems.
There's no doubt about that. Let me say that for the record. But I've really believed that emphasizing the importance of securing your patents early when I'm working with founders and startups is essential. And you know this. It's so important for, number one, your competitive advantage, even your exit strategy. But the development process, you've got to think about this, and it's got to also align with the business strategy of the company. So
that's where I struggle sometimes with startups because sometimes I see filings that don't align with business strategy and money spent on IP that would be better served, on things that do align with business strategy. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
And you see that probably more with the startup side.
Absolutely.
Right? But that's for established companies, I think of it slightly differently, more of what's their IP portfolio. How will they leverage that?
Yeah, there could be licensing opportunities, but for a startup, sometimes more isn't necessarily better.
Exactly. And, one of the things that I do believe in is, collaboration. But you can't do that when you're dealing with IP without having a strong collaboration agreement. To delineate those IP rights, you've got to innovate, but you also have to protect yourself and mitigate risks. So with strategy without understanding the risk isn't really strategy.
Exactly. So I also wanted to ask you how you see policy responses evolving to support innovation in healthcare delivery.
Yeah, so let me answer that first from a perspective of where I see a lot of innovation coming from. And where historically, perhaps it was coming from the public sector, right? Academia or the NIH, CDC, et cetera. We know that's changed, right? Look at aerospace. There's SpaceX. It's not really NASA. I mean, that's probably one of the best examples. And we're seeing the same thing in healthcare. So why is that important? Because when you see policy responses, they're going to be different for a private company that's looking at policy and regulatory issues as a real hurdle, and understanding that is important. But I would say, in general, to answer your question, I think there is an evolution of policy that is related to healthcare and the sector at large that is taking into account innovation that's happening. I do see that. It is uneven, though, across the board. So that's my first answer. I think that there are regulatory bodies, and I'll mention the FDA, right, that has stood up separate divisions to deal with AI and advanced technology. That's great. You have to do this. Regulatory bodies need to look at the rapid pace of technology to take into account that if you don't, first of all, the issue of regulatory capture, if I write the rules, maybe I'm willing to help them and capture that. If not, I'm at their mercy. So I'd rather be part of the process and deal with regulators and agencies up front. And that doesn't work if they don't have an analog on their side to be able to connect with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because I've worked with the clients and the FDA, and I don't think there's any way they're going to be able to keep up with the pace of technology. So I think what you're saying is accurate. That startups, whomever, need to be part of that process, because otherwise I think FDA is going to take too long, given the rapid advances of this technology.
Exactly. And look, I have to mention politics and how that impacts policy. And in healthcare, I've always believed, like the 5 Ps. There's politics, policy, payers, physicians, the P, or providers, and then the patient. Politics impacts every one of those Ps. There's no doubt about that. And when you think about, even right now, as we gear up for a presidential election, we look at today, Trump, Harris, and what their individual policies are. How do they relate to everything from a lot of talk on Silicon Valley all the way to the state's Medicaid, plans and policies. This is important when you're thinking about a startup and the interoperability it's going to have at all those levels, from the federal, as I said, right down to the state.
Absolutely. So, Rick, I would ask you then, as you look ahead, what do you think the future holds for new models of healthcare delivery that leverage technology to enhance care and efficiency?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the first piece is, can you make care better, and can it be more efficient and more accessible? And a new, I shouldn't say it's new, but certainly a more urgent emerging issue is clinician shortages that we're seeing.
That's a big problem. Yeah, huge.
On the physician side, across many specialties, on the nursing side, and other allied health professionals as well. This is a big deal. And how can technology mitigate those issues? That is something I think is going to be an absolute application. Then, of course, personalized medicine. Right? I talked a little bit about genetics and genomics earlier. That's going to be a big focus. Real-time monitoring of patients. Mentioned wearables, particularly folks who have chronic conditions. When you look at care of the diabetic patient, congestive heart failure patient, if you can take a CHF patient and reduce, say, a readmission of 4 times a year down to 2, not only is it great for the patient, but it makes economic sense.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's a real easy application. You think about the level of engagement an individual can have, a patient, how you can manage resources, all good. But let me give you a scenario, both an inpatient scenario in a traditional hospital and then a at-home scenario. So we all have this notion in our mind of what it is to be an inpatient in a hospital. You go on the ward, on the floor, there's a bed, you might have a private room, you might have to share it with someone. The nurse comes in, wakes you up, takes your vital signs, etc. It's very intense from a nursing perspective, right? They have to have a lot of nurses doing a lot of things and other caregivers, nursing assistants, obviously hospitalists, physician, providers, specialists, etc. I think in the future, what we'll have is probably a couple of registered nurses or advanced practice nurses, nurse practitioners, looking at a monitor that has all the patients on the unit. But this monitor is looking at their parametric data, right? All their physiological data. And it is able to basically, with some advanced warning, tell you who is declining, who is improving, and it will allow them to make care decisions in such an efficient, fast, and a velocity and speed of care that we don't have today that will avoid a lot of bad situations. I think that is going to be something that will also help mitigate the clinician shortage. Now, the same would be true for, say, a hospital at home or a patient going home. A particular individual might come to the emergency department, have a condition. You might give them a wearable, or however we'll do it. They'll be given something that they could bring back to the hospital, go home, be monitored there. We know this is successful. We did this during COVID. It worked really nicely in many areas, and it saved a lot of patients. And it also helped the hospital workload, which was really, was stress. I mean, the level of surge. So I think those are scenarios that we're going to see. But one last point I would say with respect to technology and the changes in healthcare, there's a generational impact. So when you think about millennials, I wouldn't say Gen Z, but think about millennials and young folks. They want agency over their own healthcare. Right?
They really do, yeah.
They're on their computer, they're on the internet, and there is now an entire industry, right, of retail healthcare that has stepped up to meet that demand, whether it's Hims or Hers or Roe or you name it, for a variety of different conditions where they can get their prescriptions, et cetera. Is it a perfect world? Probably not, but I do think it's the world we're headed to. And if you look at investment in that world, it's an incredible amount of investment. So with technology enabling that, we're going to see a lot more.
Yeah, and it's already starting. Like you said, the ability to email your doctor and email back and have, a televisit on Teams or whatever. It's really wild. But as you said, the millennials, that's what they want. That's how they're used to operating, and they expect to continue to operate that way in the future.
Absolutely. I see that it's more than a trend. It's here today.
So, Rick, what strategies would you recommend for tech transfer offices to effectively support the commercialization of health sector innovations?
Yeah, so I've been obviously associated with a couple of academic institutions that had tech transfer and innovation hubs, everything that you would expect a modern, high-performing academic health system would have. But I think there's some fundamentals. And the first one would be, the strong relationships with industry partners, certainly first and foremost. Also having your finger on, what's the pulse of what's happening in the industry and how does that relate to market needs? And that culture of entrepreneurialism, really important. Then are there resources that are table stakes that you need to provide? And you're very familiar with them, patenting, commercialization. You need to have mentorship that goes with that, to have a trusted advisor. There's no doubt about that. And you can only find that, I think, in a formal kind of well-constructed program or an incubator. And so that would be one piece. So I think that to actively engage with all those components are again, essential pieces. I would also say bringing in content experts, on a regular basis who can have a perspective, particularly as it relates to healthcare, because navigating the ecosystem in healthcare, it is ever changing. And the opportunities are ever changing. And when you apply technology in that, it really is, it's a great place to be right now.
Absolutely. And how do you think that universities and tech transfer offices can better collaborate with health systems and biotech companies to help accelerate innovation?
Yeah, I think partnership agreements, joint ventures, I think they make a lot of sense. Bringing together in a planning session, an interdisciplinary team of researchers, obviously clinicians, but also business experts, engineers, I mentioned, innovation hubs or consortiums. Really, I think, I don't want to say easy ways to do it, but certainly practical and tactical ways to advance that notion and to make a better, system for health systems to collaborate with them.
So, Rick, given all your experience and, where you've been in your career and all the different healthcare systems you've been involved with, what are some of the common pitfalls in the commercialization process for healthcare technologies, and how do you think they can be avoided?
Yeah, so when we think about, I think about ideation and commercialization, it's a long process. And if we were thinking about startups, but I would say, I don't want to limit it to startups, anyone who has an idea, even an existing company, and they want to bring a program to light, I think some of the pitfalls are not fully understanding and underestimating the hurdles, particularly the regulatory hurdles, right? That's a big one. I think inadequate, market understanding and fit and having that validated. Missing that is very problematic. Lack of a clear strategy, particularly when it comes to the commercialization, right? And if you have an investor, that could be a big piece of something that you're missing. What's your sales approach? Funding, really important. The burn rate they might have, all essential pieces. And, missing those, I think, would be such a setback, and sometimes it could actually be the ruin of a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. And another topic that's very complex, and we've talked about it several times here during the podcast today, is the regulatory issues, particularly in healthcare. So I'm curious what advice you'd give to tech transfer professionals to help their researchers and startups navigate these complex issues.
Sure. It all starts with education, right? On all the processes, the legal, the regulatory, the clinical, components that go into patient safety, et cetera, particularly in the delivery side. Understanding if you're in biotech, medtech, pharma, the FDA approval pathways with data and tech, everything that goes into that, including, and we know this, the privacy regulations that are associated with that, which are so huge,
so complicated,
right?
Yeah.
And then I would say, if you think about what tech transfer folks can do to help researchers, it is facilitate connections. That is a biggie that I think is really helpful for folks to get further faster.
So, Rick, as the podcast comes to a close, I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to healthcare innovators and startups who are looking to make a significant impact in the health sector?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that the first thing is focus on understanding and addressing the real need, the clinical need, the why and the what. And in this day and age, particularly when you look at healthcare, that's got to include wellness, and it also has to include leveraging technology, as we talked about. Teams. I wanted to mention that earlier, but it is so important. The right team, you can avoid lots of problems, headaches, and even disasters. Flexibility to adapt to changing market conditions and environments, even changing technologies, right? That third factor coming in. Staying informed about technology and what it looks like in other fields and how that might be applied. I think that asking for feedback from trusted folks and colleagues and experts in the field, really important. Your value proposition at the end of the day has to be solid. And understanding the IP piece that we talked about earlier, strategic partnership folks, and not forgetting that control your own destiny by checking the boxes off on these really critical components, or someone else will do it for you.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you so much, Rick. And thank you so much for all your time today. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Thank you very, very much.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Lisa.
Rick, thank you so much for joining us today on the air. It's clear that your work is making a significant impact on advancing healthcare and fostering innovation. As always, we appreciate your support and encourage you to stay connected with Autumn for more episodes featuring thought leaders and experts in tech transfer and intellectual property.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.